This is the pilot episode of the Power Healthcare Hour recorded on September 1st, 2020. I'm the host, Greg Beaumont, and any views expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the views of my employer. So first of all, you often hear that Power BI is a data visualization layer or that Power BI is the data visualization layer. There's some truth to that, but it's only a little bit of the greater picture, and it can often lead to misconceptions about the product that could have impacts on projects where you're not getting the most out of your investment in Power BI. So for those of you that have been doing business intelligence for a while, I put this slide together to look back at kind of the older SQL Server on-premise based business intelligence that was around for many, many years. I know I can remember working with SQL Server 2000 and SQL Server 2005 and seeing how all of these things have evolved over time. So you'll see that top layer is the data visualization layer. And very often you'll hear people say that Power BI is the data visualization layer, that you do your data visualizations there, and that's basically what it does. That's just part of the picture. So when the product originally launched, it pretty much was just a data visualization layer. You could do some importing of small data caches and build out some small models. But for the most part, for large enterprise solutions, most customers were still using SQL Server analysis services under the hood, this being 4 or 5 years ago. If we think back to the older SQL Server-based business intelligence, on the front end for your data visualization layer, you'd use something like SSRS or SharePoint for those who've worked in Performance Point. I was in that world too. And a lot of third-party tools actually came in and also filled up this space. Excel was and is still a very popular data visualization layer. With the on-premise version of Power BI, you can publish reports to Power BI Report Server, and then moving over to the right with Power BI Cloud, you can obviously publish your data visualization layer to the Power BI Cloud. Now, the next layer down is the semantic layer. Now, the semantic layer is basically where the logic, the metadata, data caching, that type of thing gets done. And traditionally in a SQL Server world, the semantic layer was SQL Server analysis services. Going way back, they used to call it a cube, which was the multidimensional technology. Nowadays, they call it a tabular model, which is kind of the next evolution of a cube that's much easier to use. It's a more forgiving technology, and it scales out really well in the cloud. The interesting thing about analysis services, and we can probably go into this in another video, is that it is fully baked into not only SQL Server, but it's also available as Azure Analysis Services, and it's fully cooked into Power BI. So with Power BI Report Server, there's a version of analysis services built into it. I wouldn't say it's as fully scalable as the cloud version. So with on-prem Power BI Report Server for very large models and for highly complex solutions, sometimes you still need SQL Server analysis services on the back end. But with the Power BI Cloud, when you pay for Power BI, you're getting full-blown analysis services as part of that licensing fee. So that's something that a lot of customers don't realize, and very often they don't get the most out of that investment. There's a lot of compute and processing power and value to be had there that you might already own. The next layer down in the older SQL Server-based BI stack was the data warehouse or the data mart in your databases. Traditionally, that was SQL Server, also could be any other type of relational database. In the Power BI Cloud, I would still say for enterprise grade solutions, you're going to want to look at a technology such as Azure SQL Database or Azure Synapse, or more of an Azure tool to fulfill that need. You can also use third-party tools as your data warehouse or data mart with Power BI. They are building out capabilities called data flows within Power BI, which we can go into in another discussion, which can function for some use cases as the data warehouse layer. So under the hood, data flows is actually an Azure data lake. So it's it's an enterprise grade tool that's being exposed within that software as a service. And that's one more thing that you can get out of your existing licensing for Power BI that might give you some added value. And then at the very bottom layer, which is very often the first thing that gets done for a project, you have your ETL or ELT layer, which is where all of the data that you're going to be working with gets pulled, gets manipulated. I shouldn't say manipulated, gets transformed so that it can all tie together and integrate and allow for interactive analysis. With the older SQL Server stack, that was going to be something that you traditionally did in SQL Server integration services, SSIS. So within SQL Server, you had SSIS, you had the data warehouse and the database layer, the relational database, you had the cube or SSAS, and then you had your data visualization layer. That ETL layer is also built into the Power BI cloud as part of data flows. However, once again, a good topic for future discussions. For enterprise grade ETL and ELT, I would still recommend doing that in Azure or SQL or potentially a third-party tool. Power BI Data Flows is a fantastic tool for business users to pull data in, do some transformations, do a little bit of ELT. But for large workloads and what I would call healthcare-sized workloads where you're dealing with extremely large and robust data sets, you'll still want to use something like Azure Data Factory to do a lot of that work, and then potentially also do it maybe pre-Synapse or pre-Azure SQL Database before pulling it into Power BI. That being said, for a lot of business-driven solutions, you have an ETL tool baked right into Power BI that you own as part of that licensing, and a lot of customers don't always make the most of that capability and that purchase that they made. So there's a lot of power there and a lot of value to be had when you own that Power BI license. And what's interesting here is if you kind of look at what's happening with Power BI, it's obviously not just a data visualization tool. You're building in end-to-end business intelligence capabilities that used to be completely separate products. So it used to be that within SQL Server, you had SSIS, you had the relational database, then you had SSAS, you had SSRS. All of these things are either being built into Power BI, as is the case with SSRS, which is called paginated reports within Power BI, and SSAS, which is just part of the underlying data engine of Power BI. Whereas something like SSIS, you could deploy that to Azure Data Factory, but it's also something that you could do similar types of work with data flows.